I love a good time travel story. I love all the wonder, the adventure, connections that stand the test of time. However, I don't see a lot of Black characters centered in these narratives, and I think it's because in order to truly relax into the fantasy of it all, you have to ignore too many realities. However, what if there was an author who just called a spade and said that a Black person time traveling is less of a fantasy and more of a nightmare? Enter Octavia Butler. Kindred follows Dana, a Black woman living in 1976 California who unintentionally yet repeatedly gets pulled back in time to Maryland in the early 1800s, aka the antebellum South. Now, it becomes immediately clear that Dana gets pulled to this time and place because she is connected to and responsible for a young white boy named Rufus. Now, Rufus is the heir to a plantation that owns about 38 African slaves, and it just so happens that Rufus is Dana's great-great-grandfather. Dana only gets pulled back in time when she needs to save Rufus from a life or death situation. However, once she's there, getting back to her own freedom in her own time of 1976 is just as complicated and out of her control as getting dragged into 1819 in the first place. Now, if you're anything like me, you are wary of accidentally reading like slave trauma. Like, I'm never gonna watch 12 Years a Slave, for example. This is not that. Octavia Butler can be trusted. And I could say something really cliche like, oh my gosh, this narrative is so eye-opening and it's so powerful and blah, blah, blah. Which, like, it is, but also it's just a really good adventure. It's just a good, gripping story. So I'll admit I usually try to avoid slave narratives in like movies and literature because they just wear my soul down. However, the time travel element really piqued my interest, along with this being written by Octavia Butler, who I only associate with sci-fi, and I think it was very tastefully and skillfully done. What stood out to me almost immediately was Octavia Butler's writing style. She must be the queen of show don't tell. So basically the reader is pulling their understanding and emotions through character actions and character dialogue rather than the author's summary or descriptions. With this writing style, it was not difficult for me to imagine scenarios and settings, but it sometimes was difficult for me to figure out who was saying what during long exchanges of dialogue. However, overall, I do prefer this writing style because a first-person account of chattel slavery, like, there's just nothing to embellish. There's nothing to idealize. So I really appreciated the lack of, like, very flowery and poetic language, to be honest. I think Butler gave you exactly what you needed when you needed it to understand the flow of the story and the impact of a moment. Kindred is both plot and character-driven. I think more plot-driven, though. But Octavia Butler does a great job with her character relationships. So Dana is our main character and first-person narrator. Kevin is her husband, who is white, and yes, his race is relevant. Rufus is a morally conflicted man of his time, and Alice is a Black free woman that Rufus falls in love with. Rufus does not know that he is Dana's ancestor. He just knows that Dana shows up whenever he's about to die and chooses to save him. Dana basically keeps saving him because she's waiting for him to father her great-grandparent. But to Rufus, he doesn't know why she keeps saving him or if she will keep saving him. I love how Octavia Butler makes it very clear that when Rufus is young and impressionable child, he has some saving grace moments, but ultimately he grows into a white man and slave master who has to contend with the fact that this magical Black woman has his life in her hands. And he does not contend with that power imbalance very well. Okay, so on page 206, this is what Dana says about Rufus. I kept thinking I knew him, and he kept proving to me that I didn't. I mean, throughout the story, Rufus constantly exerts his power over Dana as a man, as a white person, and as a slave owner, and keeps testing her limits and seeing if she will come back to save him, and she does, ultimately. And of course, it made me think of the cycle of abuse because he keeps testing her limits and she keeps coming back to save him, but also is overtly abused because this is literally the antebellum South. He is a slave holder and slave owner. He's not just some random white person. There's this insane imbalance of power in terms of gender, in terms of class, in terms of race, but also in terms of just Dana's existence as a human being kind of relies on him doing fucked up shit. Just as Dana is not above slipping into that abusive relationship with Rufus, neither is Alice. And Alice is the woman that Rufus falls in love with, and Alice does not want him, and she makes it very clear that she does not want him. Yet Rufus exerts his power over her as a man, as a white person, and as a slaveholder throughout years of her life in order to get what he wants. Alice and Dana become close to each other during Dana's visits to this time period, and I really appreciated Alice because she regularly called Dana out whenever Dana was becoming complacent, when Rufus would try to exert power over her, even though Alice was in the same bind, and probably why Alice was able to scope it out so easily. Alice and Dana's bond also made me reflect on the title of the book, because when you think of Kindred, of course you think of the family ties that are dragging Dana into the 1800s in the first place, but I also think of kindred spirits and the parallels between Dana and Alice in their relationship to Rufus, and just as women of their time. What also stood out to me was Dana's relationship to privilege, because there was this one point that Kevin accidentally went back in time with her, Kevin, her white husband, and during his stay on the plantation, he claimed Dana to be his slave that he had elaborate plans to free after she helped him with research for a book he was writing. It stood out to me that they didn't even try to pretend that Dana was a free woman. Like, I get it, she could have been threatened with slavery, but even parading around as Kevin's slave, she was threatened with slavery. Like, Rufus's dad regularly tried to buy her. I think it really stood out to me because I'm not reading this in 1978 when this book came out. I'm reading this in 2024. And also, I am a black woman who is married to a white man. And the thought of even pretending, I can't even say it. Like, the thought of even pretending that, like, makes me want to spit. I feel like even for my safety, it probably would have occurred to me, but that wouldn't have been the plan that I went with. It just stood out to me. There are also so many moments that I had such little patience for Kevin, because he almost reminded me of Rufus in a way. Like, he loved Dana in his own way, but seemingly within the limits of his own time, because when they were on the plantation, Kevin was genuinely baffled that it never occurred to Dana to capitalize on some of the privileges that she had, the limited privileges she had in comparison to the other slaves on the plantation. So, for example, Dana gets hot coffee thrown on her. She gets slapped in the face during this visit where Kevin is. And Kevin is really baffled that Dana doesn't come and report back to him, like, and tell him that this happened to her. Dana also sleeps on the attic floor with the other house slaves at night instead of sleeping in the guest room of the plantation house with Kevin. And he's shocked that she hasn't made a fuss about it yet. Dana tries to make her husband understand her point of view, which is, one, Kevin, you're not always going to be there when I get dragged back here, so I need to get used to maneuvering through these spaces without your favoritism. And two, because it further ostracizes her from the slaves on the other slaves on the parent plantation, and puts her on more high alert to the white folks. So it's basically second nature for Kevin to capitalize on those privileges and lean into those privileges, but it's second nature for Dana to consider her safety and to consider the communal good, like the impact of her actions on the other slaves. It's second nature for her to recognize that there is no luxury in making the wrong move. Like, there's not often room to have a second chance, especially since she's already being looked at sideways for talking white, right? And for, disappearing and reappearing magically at will. So there's that. There are some saving graces to Kevin. He gets trapped in the 1800s for like 5 years, which sounds miserable regardless of race, to be honest. And during that time, he helps runaway slaves in the Underground Railroad. But I kind of feel like he has the benefit of hindsight to be on the right side of history. Like, He just aggravated me. I think this quote sums it up very well for me. On page 78, Kevin says, "There are so many really fascinating times we could have gone back to visit." Dana laughs without humor and says, "I can't think of any time I'd like to go back to. But of all of them, this one must be the most dangerous for me anyway." I have absolutely no desire to be a part of this book's universe or literary world, but it's also kind of haunting to understand that in some ways I don't really have a choice in that. I mean, obviously I'm not going to be ripped back in time to ensure my great-grandmother is born, but I am living in a timeline where there are probably many stories in my ancestry that are very similar to Dana's. Overall, I give it 5 stars. It's great for what it is. It's not trying to teach us things that we should already know, but it does make us feel things in our gut. My expectations for this book were exceeded. I knew I was going to enjoy it, but I didn't expect to finish it in like 2 days, and I haven't done that in a while. I recommend Kindred for anyone who wants to read something that is medium to fast-paced, who wants something that's thought-provoking. I feel like the book was emotional and adventurous. If you are sensitive to themes of slavery, namely chattel slavery of the Americas, I would say that it's somewhere in between Django Unchained and the 1977 Roots in terms of intensity and in terms of focus on atrocities. It's not humorous like Django, but I mean, let's be real, Django had some pretty hard scenes in it too, so I think it's somewhere in there. This is a story whose plot and characters are definitely going to stay with me. I'm very glad that I got the opportunity to read it, and I'm glad that it exceeded my expectations, and I feel like it might exceed yours too if you've never read anything by Octavia Butler. I really appreciate you hanging out with me. Enjoy your next read. See you soon.